Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing very well. Yourself?
Oh, I can't complain. Things are picking up. I feel like the end of the year is upon us, even faster this year than ever before. But I feel that way every year. And all the planning that we do in March and April try to get out ahead of the curve, and yet you still, by the time this part of May rolls around, you feel like you just can't catch your breath regardless of how much prep you do ahead of time.
There's no question that the end of the year is quite a stressful, busy time, and you're right. There's nothing you can do on the front end to make it any easier, but everybody's in the same boat.
I'd love to say that makes me feel better, but it really doesn't. But a bunch of things I wanted to get to today. I know we have a sort of full agenda. But this was just announced today. This is the New York State Education Department has a new commissioner. They've had an intergalactic search and to replace the wonderful, almighty, powerful Dr. John B. King, who graced our presence and was gone far too soon, was taken from us far too soon. And he got a promotion. I think he works for the federal government now. But so he did his thing, and now we have a woman named Mary Ellen. I don't know if it's Elia or Elia. I apologize for pronouncing it incorrectly, but she is the first one that they found in about 5-6 months to fill the gigantic shoes of Dr. King.
Well, I do remember. I remember when Dr. King was appointed, and I read the article about him in the New York Times, and one of his claims to fame, or one of his achievements, was when he was a principal, he instituted a rule that no student was allowed to speak in the hallways during passing time. And I had to actually reread it about 5 times. I just couldn't believe that somebody in education would think that that's the cure for all the ills in education today.
It's called being a visionary, Nick. I don't know.
But there's no question. Everybody knows there was a lot of controversy in education, and he did not leave in a smooth fashion. So I figured they would appoint somebody who was going to be as non-controversial as possible. Well, I guess I was wrong about that.
Well, hold on. I mean, the Board of Regents Chancellor Merrill Tisch says that this woman has a, quote, remarkable record of working collaboratively with teachers, parents, and school leaders to get things done. And if you can't trust Regent Tisch, who can you trust?
Well, I want to be as fair as possible because
Okay.
I think everybody is entitled to that, and I will give her all the benefits of the doubt in her new job. But
You're a better person than I? Okay.
But there is no question, based on what I have read, and I'm not sure how much you know about her previous employment, but she was dismissed from the Hillsborough School District down in Tampa, in Florida. Mm-hmm. And it was a very contentious situation. The school board voted 4-3 there. So she's leaving Tampa with a $1.1 million package and now coming to work for us in New York. And
well, she's only making $250,000 a year here, so.
Right. So, but when you read the articles from the local newspapers there, it's very divided. There are people that have a lot of negative things to say about her, and then there are people that say you can't believe everything that's said. So that's why I'm trying to be fair about it. There's no question you could easily read up on her, and it doesn't come across flattering at all.
Can't we just believe the things that we want to believe?
I see the sarcasm is clearly going on one end of the discussion today.
Well, I am known to be sarcastic from time to time. But just to continue with this press release, it says, quote, during her time in Hillsborough, she led a successful introduction of the Common Core standards. Should I stop right there? Do you want to jump in on that one, or should I?
I didn't read anything about that. I do know that she fully supports the use of testing to evaluate teachers. And I believe she was actually superintendent of the year
in Florida.
In Florida.
Yes. And she was runner-up or she was one of the finalists for the National Superintendent of the Year.
Right. And I believe the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a big supporter of her as well. So she
It must
will,
be it must be a coincidence. There's no way that those things could be connected.
but she definitely look. The criticisms are very rough. They're pretty tough in what they've said about her. People, parents are accusing her of not meeting the special needs children, and there's some criticism about not doing enough to deal with the minority population in Tampa. So she's good. She's definitely going to have to answer to some of these questions as more people, of course, find out about this.
Right. And listen, there's nobody who could walk into this job, especially after the damage done by Commissioner King, and just have smooth sailing from day one. I mean, there are just so many frayed nerves and awful feelings that are left with so many people across the state that it's going to be very difficult to win people over. Not that it can't be done, but if it's going to be more of the same and you keep kind of banging the same drum that he was banging, that's not going to endear herself to too many people.
Right. Well, like I said in the beginning, I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think most of us do. I'm just very surprised that they would select somebody that seems to have so much controversy in her background. I mean, I'm just reading story after story from the local paper. Look, in the internet world, you can find this information out very quickly. 10, 20 years ago, we would never know any of this. There would be unless you had a connection with somebody down in Tampa, how would you even find it out? So,
well, she was originally from New York. I think
yes,
she was in Western New York.
That is correct.
And then I'm trying to see if I can find her little history here, her bio. She was a social studies teacher, all right, so she can't be that bad. And that was over at Sweet Home Central School District, and then she taught there for a while, and then she became a reading teacher in Florida, and then for I guess about 16 years or so, she held it says various administrative positions in the district, including General Director of Secondary Education, which is very specific, and Chief Facilities Officer. So I guess if the pipe bursts in the bathroom in your school, you should definitely give her a call as well, because it seems like she can do everything.
Yeah. Well, we will find out soon enough, because in this environment, people are they're not going to lay low. They're going to be very curious about her past and what her goals are for the future.
Yeah. Well, let's say you can obviously hear my hostility already, and I don't even know the woman. I don't even think she's gotten her password to the computer yet in her office. So, but it just, this is part and parcel when so many people are left with such a bad taste in their mouths with the previous administration. And the administration before that, if I recall, didn't end too well either. Weren't there all kinds of allegations and people were run out of town before John King came in?
Yes.
So they just have a long track record now of not really delivering the leadership that we need and the vision that we need. And one of the greatest grievances I have against John King is that he was tone deaf and he really just couldn't hear anything that anybody was saying, from parents to teachers to administrators. The only people he seemed to listen to were Pearson and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Arnie and Duncan. And so listen, it worked for him. He got a promotion and he's off doing damage on a larger scale now. But I don't know, just leaves a bad taste.
I know. Well, maybe we can get a listener from the Hillsborough County school system and they can shed some light on her performance down there.
That'd be great. I'd love to hear that. Or someone who had her as a social studies teacher back in Western New York.
That's true.
25 years ago.
Yes.
But anyway, so I think we've done enough damage to this woman already. So we'll move on to our next topic. So we're getting near graduation time, and every year the New York Times, usually in May, they put out, I guess, their top, what they consider the top graduation speeches from the various colleges across the country. And they have some excerpts and so on their website, and I'll certainly put a link on the show notes to that. But it got me thinking really twofold. One, is there anything that you heard or you've read from any of these commencement speeches that you wanted to discuss or that you found particularly profound? And the other part of this little segment is, if you were giving a commencement speech to the high school or to college students, what kind of advice would you give, and what would you include in that commencement speech?
Well, my favorite high school commencement speech was the one from 2012. Do you remember the one by David McCullough Jr.,
Yep,
who said to the kids, "You're not special"?
that's right. That was viral.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I hope people that haven't, maybe you could put a link to that as well, because
Sure.
people might think he was being too cold with me just saying you're not special. But I really thought it was a great message. These kids who are considered part of that trophy generation, where everybody gets a plaque and everybody gets commendation for participating, and we set them up sometimes for failure. It's actually funny, ironically, that came up in one of my classes today in our discussion, and many of the kids, these are juniors, they agreed with it. They did think that as you get older, we have to stop worrying about giving everybody participation trophies. Of course, symbolic of their involvement. But
Right.
I thought that was fantastic. I really did.
Yeah, I agree. We do have a mollycoddling generation, and it's we're all guilty of it to a degree. I don't know why it happened this way, but it just seems as though parents don't want their children to experience any pain or discomfort from literally the womb to the tomb. I hate to quote West Side Story like that, but they just don't want them to experience any setbacks. It's so unrealistic. But this is the generation that we are right now, and it's so many people. We demand things, we dispose of things that we don't want. We just expect everything to go our way. We have many first world problems. We don't have, I guess what you call real world or third world problems or developing world problems. But my internet upload speeds aren't fast enough. My download speeds aren't fast enough. The battery doesn't last long enough, and so somehow that's sort of translated into everybody wanting everything to be perfect for themselves and for their children, and that means that they can't tolerate or cope with any kind of setback. So as a result, we start to slowly but surely get an environment in which everybody is wonderful and everybody is great at everything and gets a trophy for everything, and there is no score, in little league if you're too small, and nobody really learns how to lose as a result of that.
Yeah, and I think his speech really touched on all of that. I think he really did a great job of explaining to kids that there is going to be rejection in your life and there's going to be failure in your life. And it's how you deal with that. It's how you overcome obstacles that makes you the person you want to be. So I don't know why so many people feel the need to protect kids to that degree. There's no question. Listen, you care for your child and you want to do everything you can to make their life as great as possible. But part of that has to be them being able to deal with adversity, because it comes no matter what path you take. Now, you had asked me about speeches this year. One of the ones I was really impressed by was at Gettysburg College. It was by Major General Charles Bolden Jr. And I think it touched on a very important theme. He started by talking to the audience and saying how, look, some of you already know what you want to do. He says, you want to write for the New York Times. You want to be an FBI agent. You want to, create a game-changing renewable energy source. And he says, go for it. That's great. He says, follow your dream. And it's very inspirational. But that leaves out such a large segment of the population of kids who don't know what they want to do yet. And I think too often we send a message to those people that you're in trouble. But that's not true. It's okay to find your calling later on in life. Now, he was speaking to a group of college graduates. And I think even in high school, so many kids we teach are so worried that if they don't know what they want to do right away, that they're going to fail. And that's just not the case. If you're constantly on a path to learning and working hard, eventually you will find what it is you want to focus on in life. And I thought it was a great speech. I'm not sure if you saw it, but I really thought he had a
No,
lot
I
of...
haven't.
Yeah, it was really nicely done. Very nicely done.
Joseph Biden starts his speech with, or at least the excerpt that they start with in the Times, quote, "For your generation, there's an incredible amount of pressure on you on all of you to succeed, particularly now that you've accomplished so much. So, well, this is you speaking to Yale University, but what have they accomplished exactly? I mean, listen, Yale is wonderful. I would love for my kids to go there, but what have they actually accomplished other than earning a degree from Yale, which in and of itself is terrific, but now what?
Yeah, there's a lot more to do. You're absolutely right about that. During these speeches, I think everybody's trying to be as optimistic as possible.
Right.
And I think we should also realize we live in an age where there's a lot of pressure on these commencement speakers. Everything's on the internet. Like you said, it's on the New York Times. When we graduated college, it was whoever was in the audience might have told a few people, hey, I heard a great speech. And that was it. Now everything is recorded and everything, they have transcripts. So it goes viral. So there's an awful lot of pressure for these speakers.
That's true. So now, since there's a lot of pressure on these speakers, I'm going to ask you to be one. So what, if you were giving that commencement speech, what advice would you give, and what would you say to either the high school graduating class or the college graduating class of 2015?
Oh, now that is too much pressure. I can't believe you just did that to me.
Katie Couric should be the only one who has this kind of pressure?
I cannot come up with a great commencement speech in all of 2 seconds. However,
come on. You give yourself too little credit.
However, I will tell you, no, if I were going to give a commencement speech, I would do my best with humor, which I often fail at in my classroom. But then...
You should write the speech when you're in Kentucky, because you're hilarious in Kentucky.
Well, we'll get to that when I get to the AP reading. But I think I would end my speech with a quote that I like to use in class from Robert Kennedy. And the quote is, few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. And in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation.
That's really good.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic quote. And it's the truth, because especially, and I haven't thought about this quote in a while, actually. There's just so much pressure on everybody today to change the world, to make a difference, to be happy. But everybody can't, it's one person doing his or her job. And when you put it all together in totality, God, Robert Kennedy says it so much better than I just did. But when you think about it that way, I think it's much more relaxing for young people to enter the world. When each person becomes better at what he does, treats people better, cares about others, all those small changes really make a difference. And that's what shapes a generation. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of respect for the older generation, or even our generation as of right now, the way government is running.
Well, it's hard to have respect for what's going on when you see it. I mean, there are individuals who are doing wonderful things, but in its totality, the Congress and the executive branch for a long time now have really been, I guess, to use one of our rating system's parlance, highly ineffective. And they're letting a generation down. And the problem with generations is you can't let too many of them down in a row, otherwise you have real problems. Problems that you can't come back from.
Although I really do believe that the younger generation is going to change the trajectory. I absolutely believe that.
What gives you reason to believe that?
I think we're so quick to be critical of young people, and we don't give them credit for what they can do. I think they're brighter than all other generations. I think they're more creative than all other generations, and I really believe they are consensus builders. I think they want to work together. And I think they've grown up watching our government be so divided that they don't want that anymore. They want to see people come together. They don't feel as if they have the ability to change that from their vantage point. Now, they don't have the ability to change the system. They have to be part of the system to change it. And I'd like to think that our younger elected officials, the younger generation, that they will change that.
I would love to see that, obviously. The problem is the role of money is so destructive in the political process that which young people will have the access to politics and to elected office to even begin to make these kinds of changes that you're suggesting.
Yeah. Well, now this is becoming a government podcast. So,
One podcast at a time.
yes.
So if I were giving this speech, the person that I would quote, and this is not going to take you by surprise at all, is Thomas Friedman. And that is quite simply always be in beta, which is his latest mantra. Essentially, when you are testing software, you have your beta version of the software and you're constantly checking it for effectiveness and efficiency, and is it doing the job that it's supposed to do? And of course you'll find that it isn't in some way, shape, or form, and you're constantly reforming, constantly tweaking, constantly making it better. And his suggestion and his advice is to always be in beta, meaning you've never reached the point where you can sit back and say it's done and it's the way it should be. There's always something that needs to be tweaked. There's always something that can be better, and you have to be able to reflect on your own world and the things that you do and the actions that you take to find out where those improvements can be made, and then go out and make them, and constantly be working to make yourself a better person. So I think if you combine the Kennedy quote with Friedman's always be in beta, you'd have, a pretty decent commencement speech, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's great, and you'll be glad to know. It reminds me, the current seniors at my school, when they were in 7th grade, I had one section of them, and I had introduced Thomas Friedman to them in 7th grade, not expecting anybody to know who he was.
But that's not in the curriculum. Sorry, I had to do it.
I knew you had to, but a few kids said they knew who Thomas Friedman was. And I said, well, that's fantastic. How are you aware of him? And they said, oh, last year at our 6th grade graduation, our principal quoted Thomas Friedman in the speech. And
wow.
Yeah. And I now I'm feeling guilty because I never told, I don't think the principal's there anymore. I think he retired, but I never even wrote to him or emailed him to let him know how impressed I was by that. You know what?
Maybe he wouldn't have retired if you had reached out to him.
Oh, great. Now you make him feel guilty. Instead of saying, well, Nick, why don't you go reach out to him now? It's never too late.
Oh, I don't believe that.
You don't work that way. Okay. So, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to try to figure out where he is. So.
Well, that's very nice. I think you should. I think it's a wonderful idea. You go for it. Is that encouraging enough?
That sounded very sincere. Thank you very much.
Yes, really. I worked on that for a while. But I'd like to transition. You actually mentioned before that this generation, you believe, is a generation that wants to collaborate and wants to get things done. And that sort of takes us directly into our Methods Lab segment, which is on collaborative and cooperative learning, or non-whole group instruction. So, do you think that perhaps this generation feels this way because they've been exposed to a significant amount of cooperative learning in their formative years? I mean, we used to have classrooms where the desks were literally bolted into the floor, and the last 20, 30 years that has been changed, and the furniture moves around, and people have been encouraged to have students working together cooperatively. Do you think that's bearing fruit, or do you think it's something else at play?
It's probably a combination of factors, but obviously from the classroom standpoint, that would contribute to it. I think, and I've noticed even in the course, because I've been teaching 21 years, that group instruction has worked better for me more recently. I think earlier in my career, there wasn't much of an effort put forth by the kids, and it would be more one student doing all the work. Mm-hmm. And I haven't found that as much more recently. I think
what changed? Because that's one of the criticisms
right.
of cooperative grouping, is that you have the alpha dogs who basically grab the assignment and they get working, and then you have the kids who get on their phones and start texting.
Right.
And the work gets done, but it's not truly a group effort.
Could it be technology has actually helped that it's a lot easier to do the work? I know that one of the more recent activities I did was a decade culture project, and the kids were able to, some of them created Google Docs, and some of them had PowerPoints that they could all edit, and it was just so easy for them to put all the work together.
They have the tools.
Yeah, and I didn't even have to, and these are 8th graders, I was so impressed that I didn't even have to divide up the work, that I was able to just give the assignment. Because I remember in the past, I would have to sit with each group and say, okay, you'll be responsible for the fashion of the decade.
You're the recorder.
You're the recorder. You're the music. You're the film. I didn't have to. Now, I was prepared to do that if I needed to. But one day in the lab, and they worked right away. And each group put a great effort into it, and the product was as good as I've ever had for that project. I of course I have my criticisms that I shared with them, but they really worked very nicely together. I think technology has something to do with that. They're used to working together, sending text messages. I mean, it sounds silly, but they're so comfortable with the technology aspect of the work.
That's true. And almost instantaneously, when you ask students to do something, they immediately create an Instagram page, a Facebook page, or this page, or that, a group chat. They're instantly, almost instinctively creating those platforms so they can each connect to one another. It's in the old days, the teacher used to say, make sure you get the phone number of at least one person in the class so you can have someone to contact, if you need to get the homework if you're sick. Does anybody not have everybody else's cell phone or Instagram or you name it at this point
No,
in the whole school?
No, you're absolutely right. And I used to be worried. I was always afraid of giving group assignments that required them to do stuff out of school because one kid can't make it. He has religion, she has dance, he has basketball, right. And now you get the phone call, and rightfully so. They couldn't meet up. They don't have to worry about meeting up together. Now technology, they can all do it whenever it fits their time schedule.
That's right. And not just meet up, but they have to meet up, take the bus or the train down to the library. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, so we used to go down to Grand Army Plaza. We used to go into the microfiche room, make sure you have enough change to make photocopies and from the microfiche. And then you bring all that back, and then you first get to work. Now they could literally show up with their laptops or their tablets or their phones, and they could start accessing databases from everywhere and anywhere in a heartbeat. Yeah. And they don't even have to come over. They can do it right through Skype or FaceTime, kind of like what we're doing now with the podcast.
Absolutely. But I don't think either of us want to minimize that creating appropriate group assignments or cooperative learning activities takes time. And
that was my next question.
Yeah. And you are going to fail. There is no question. I mean, you're going to have lessons that just don't work, that you think are great, and you realize in the execution that something went wrong, because it's much more challenging to get the kids to work on these activities together, because there's so many different things that can go wrong. When you're the teacher in front of the room and you are presenting a lesson to the class, there's fewer opportunities for error, I think. Mm-hmm. So you can't anticipate how kids are going to react. You have to make sure you explain very clearly what the expectations are for the group assignment. There has to be some component of an assessment. It doesn't necessarily have to be a grade, but there does have to be some, whether it's a presentation or a grade attached to it, or a homework assignment that's connected to it. So there's a lot of different components that go into these type of lessons.
And when do you determine that a particular lesson would be a good lesson for cooperative learning? Because clearly you can't. This is not something that you could do on a daily basis. So how do you make that determination?
I think when I'm lesson planning, I look at it as two different components. There are some times when I just want them to work cooperatively for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, something that'll build off of what I've taught. Maybe it is, we finish up a lesson on a war, and we ask the kids to finish up by saying, write a diary entry as a soldier, in the war. Mm-hmm. And that's something quick that you want them to work together, talk, one person can record, and it maybe takes them 5 or 10 minutes. Then you have other lessons where you want them to spend a longer amount of time on the activity. This year I had done something where I asked students to play the role of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, pretend that they're alive today, and write a dialogue where they are discussing the recent events in Ferguson, Missouri, from their perspective. Now that's a great assignment. But now I know that that's going to take a lot more thought, a lot more time, and I want that to be more of a fuller class period.
Right. Well, because they have to wrap their heads around two gigantic concepts. They have to wrap their heads around Ferguson and everything that's going on there, and they have to be able to fully comprehend everything that Du Bois and Washington represented.
Right. And that was more of a full flip. We could talk about the flipped classroom maybe at another podcast, but that was where they had watched a video that I had produced comparing Booker T. Washington to W.B. Du Bois and their views. So they had already had the information presented to them by me for homework the night before. Now
That's good.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because there's something hidden in there that I think is very crucial, especially for teachers who are maybe just starting out in their careers. You want to try to avoid situations where students are purely just left to Google things, because when you Google something, if you Google Booker T. Washington, if you're 13, you just don't possess the ability to sift through the 1.7 million hits that come up and really process and understand what fits your needs and what is even grade appropriate for what you need to know, because you could take probably a semester course in college on Booker T. Washington. So there's a lot to know, but what do you need to know to complete this assignment without kind of getting lost down the click hole of the internet? So what you did there was you presented the material that they need to know on a level that is easy for them to digest it, versus just saying Google Booker T. Washington and see what you find and do your research that way. And I think there's a very structured and effective way of getting kids to do work on their own, as opposed to just leaving them alone with the internet, because it's too vast. And just from planning, and I remember from planning and looking for a political cartoon on something, or looking for a quote or an excerpt of a quote for something, I could get lost and spend 45 minutes or an hour before I realized how much time I've just wasted finding things that I just can't use, or that don't work, or too easy, too difficult, can't reproduce it, all the different problems that you run into. So to do the work on your end, and it's more work on the teacher's end for sure, but it will help the kids and it will help them produce the kind of quality product that you're looking for on the other end.
Right, and I do want to end by saying, though, what I do really like about cooperative learning, and it's not something that you can do all the time, but in any subject, it affords you the opportunity to go speak to kids who may not be comfortable speaking in the larger class setting. When you can walk around and talk to 2 or 3 kids at a time, and they may have questions or just about anything. I always get to know kids, just get to talk to them, in small group settings. I find that very valuable. So it's like a separate benefit from the activities.
And what do you do when you find students who aren't engaged in the activity and others are carrying the weight of the group?
Depending on the class and the grade level, sometimes I could be sarcastic by saying, that it's so nice.
I don't like sarcasm.
Yes, I know you don't. And you got to know your audience. If it's the older kids, you can say how you think they're doing such a great job when they're clearly not doing anything. But really, for the younger kids, I think once you go over to them and ask them what they've contributed, they usually admit, okay, I haven't done anything yet, and they do get going. Maybe I'm being a little bit naive about that, but I think that when you talk to kids, they see that they need to put more of an effort in. Now, if it becomes an ongoing problem, then you have to hold them accountable with a grade. And if the grade is a failing grade, well, there's going to be a consequence to their work. So I think it's like anything else. How do you deal with a kid who doesn't do homework? Well, you talk to that student. What is it about the assignment? What is it about your life after school? Is it just being lazy? Kids will usually, when you give them the opportunity, and you don't just attack them, but when you give them the opportunity to take responsibility, often they will.
Right. Well, and you just hit the nail on the head, because very frequently, I won't say very frequently, but on occasion, teachers will take that highly negative approach, and they'll say, oh, you want to fail? I guess you want to fail. And they start talking about everything from the negative side of it, as opposed to discussing with the child how he can achieve and how he could succeed, and try to inspire him or encourage him along, as opposed to browbeat him into submission and in order to do your assignment.
Absolutely.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate the insight there. So that sort of wraps up our topics for this podcast. as always, if you'd like to follow us in the iTunes store, we are there. You could subscribe to us. You could also find us on the web at stateofedpodcast.com. We'd also love to hear your thoughts or any questions that you have, suggesting a topic perhaps if you'd like to do that. That's ask@stateofedpodcast.com. You could also find us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. And I believe this is our last podcast before you head off to the great beyond, which is Kentucky.
Yes, I will be leaving early Saturday morning for my trip to grade, or they like to say read, the AP responses for United States history.
That's so Larry David. No, we're not going to grade it. We're just going to read it.
They make a very big point of that. You are reading. You are not grading. No.
Right. And who comes into grade after you finish reading them?
Well, it should be an interesting year because this is the first year for the newly redesigned American history curriculum.
Very nice. Well, I hope that you can. I know you can't share a whole lot. It's sort of like Las Vegas. Whatever happens there stays there. But any kind of insight or thoughts that you could provide for us in terms of those changes and what you get out of this experience, I would love to hear those thoughts, and perhaps you can share them with our listeners.
That sounds good.
Well, I hope you have a great trip over to Kentucky, and hopefully we'll get to do a podcast while you're there, and wish you all the best.
Sounds good. I'll make sure we get it done.
Sounds great. All right. See you next time.